Marion, good evening. Sunday again.
Good evening. It is Sunday again, although I'm surprised people realise that it's Sunday. It's a bit of any day in some households. Good evening again in lockdown land. I think the only difference today is the weather's been rather horrible in London. It's been cold and windy. But cold and windy has not stopped all the pollen. So if you are a hay fever sufferer like me, I have every sympathy. Before I came on tonight, I took my third antihistamine today. I think we're suffering lots and lots at the moment.
Tonight, it's still very, very strange, and I have no idea what day of the week it is anymore. Just cannot keep up.
I think Friday bank holiday confused many of us. It will be stranger tomorrow, I think, but still.
So what are we talking about tonight?
Tonight we are going to focus on this stuff, elastic therapy bands, and how we can use it from ages too tiny up to grandparents. We won't just be talking about therapy bands, we'll be talking about alternatives. Obviously, like anything, we talk about the actual bands themselves, the precautions, the things that you don't want to do, and we're going to move on to any weights and resistance. And because I have sort of set up the room with lots of bits of equipment and lots of things going on, it may be a bit bitty because I'll have to move the iPad around. At the moment I'm holding it. I will be moving it so you can see my mate, who's actually set up with a piece of TheraBand as a mobile arm, and I got her on a frame which is actually a closed horse, which is fine for a dolly and would be fine for a small type 1, but probably would be pulled over by anybody bigger. So we have to think about what we're going to do for frames. So there's a lot going on tonight, but ask any old questions. And the most important thing is also a topic for next time, because I am happy to talk about whatever, but it's what you want to hear and what perhaps we haven't covered for a while. So let's start straight away with therapy bands. Most of you have them. You can buy them in places like Tiger, which I know you can't at the moment, but you can certainly buy them online. And be careful when you buy it online, because you need to think about the weight that you are buying. Most brands have the lighter colors, the lighter resistance, going up to dark colors. Some companies make black or dark gray. Those are the heaviest resistance. Now there are a couple, this, which anybody who comes to us will know, is a very, very lightweight resistance. This is the lightest of all resistance that you can get. This is cream TheraBand. It is only made by the company TheraBand. If there's any physios watching, you cannot get this except from TheraBand. There is a similar one from a company called Meglio. They are quite common on the internet. It's not quite as nice, it's not quite as light, but it's certainly their lightest band. It's a sort of creamy orange color, whereas the TheraBand is a cream. It has a lovely feel to it, and we love it for the weakest children, babies, and even some adults. We tend to stick to blue and green. Red and yellow are lighter resistance. Now, what I have done today is I want to look at the bands not only from an exercise point of view, but from a support point of view. Let's start there, because that'll make life easier for me. What I want to show you is how I've set up the doll here. And my doll is sitting, happens on a box. And she has her arm with a piece of TheraBand tied to her arm, which is tied from above. I'm hoping you can see that. Can't really. Let's move out a bit. There we go. And what she has is she has this TheraBand tied above, as I say, on a clothes horse, and by taking the weight of the arm, you can, she, as in my little type 1, not even so little, this is in effect the same idea as a mobile arm support. So if you don't have mobile arm support and you have a way of tying this on securely, because that's important, and you can do that with an adult or a child, then the important thing is to give them the ability to move freely themselves, because that is active movement, and that is always what we want, is active movement. And merely by taking the weight of the limb with the TheraBand, they can move quite easily. If you have a child who's struggling to do things with their arms, if you can rig up some sort of frame, allow them to do that, then they will be able to play themselves instead of you doing everything. Even if it's touching the iPad, they can swing, they can move their arm in and out. Make sure it's around the wrist and not the upper arm. They've got movement, lots of active movement. It's a great way to allow them the ability without them being stuck in one position, or without you having to move them or giving up and them not playing the sort of games that they would enjoy merely because they can't move their arms around. Now, when you've got a baby lying down, then the best thing you can use is one of the play gyms that has the arch over with the toys dangling down. And what you can do is you can actually attach toys with TheraBand. So this is a teddy bear attached to the thing by TheraBand, because then they can bash the toys. You can put whatever you like on, you can put rattles. It doesn't have to be a teddy bear that's suspended. It could be anything that's also suspended. They can pull it, they can make bells ring, and that's another nice way of exercising. And merely by doing that, as you can see, the doll's working with me because we're attached to the same thing. But you can do lots of things hanging toys with the TheraBand, which is more effective than just hanging with the chains that they come with, because there's no recoil, there's no resistance, there's no effort apart from lifting your arm up. But once you get your arm up to reach the toys, then you can pull against resistance, you can pull against an easy band, you can make it a harder band. The recoil will be better, bigger spring. Just make sure they're not going to hit themselves in the face. Don't forget legs. If you're going to tie up an arm, you can tie up a leg. There is no reason why you can't have some TheraBand on a leg, and then you've got a leg to move free and kick. Now, if you're on the floor or on a bed with an adult, if there's some way with a child, you've got a monkey pole or a hoist bar, and you can hang it from the hoist bar. You can do exercises with the hoist bars as well. You can tie TheraBand to hoist bars. You'll need a reasonable length, so you have to think about the size or the length you're ordering. Hang it on the hoist bar. If you've got a ceiling track hoist, you can move it to anywhere you want. Hang it on the hoist bar, and then you can do exercises, you can play games, you can take the weight of the arms. If you have a mobile hoist, even better, because you can bring it over the back of the wheelchair and use the mobile hoist to hang up to. Now, obviously that doesn't work with small children, which is why I've rigged this up with a clothes horse, but it has to be secure. You may have to weight it. You may have somebody like Grandpa who can build a frame. I'm saying Grandpa because they tend to be a lot better fix-its than most of us, but build a frame, solid, something that's not going to fall over when you pull, something that can work in lots of different positions. The beauty of this clothes horse is you could actually get, it's got a real sort of A-frame. You can get right underneath it, do lots of arms and legs. You can do it from the side as well. So that is one way of using TheraBand to actually suspend arms and legs. Again, in lying, don't forget side lying, because then you can go backwards and forwards as well. With the legs, it does make a difference whether you've got it tied at the ankle or at the knee, because it's much harder to work with it at the knee, because then the foot part is flopping around if it's not strong. So think about it, but be creative, find a way of doing this, because it's a lovely way of exercise, can be fun, can be made into games, as can everything. And as I say, for the weakest, doesn't have to be babies, it could be children, it could be teenagers or adults. It's a way of freeing their arms so that you can do the work yourself. You can actually move your arms rather than being restricted. Many, many people have the ability to move their arms, but not the ability to lift them. Now, you've got mobile arm supports for many people, I agree, but this way you are doing much more work and you have the freedom of knowing that you're doing more of it. Plus, you've got a nice bit of bounce that you can work against, which gives you that bit more exercise. Again, the mobile arm supports are a bit more passive. So we're just going to move the iPad so we can move back a bit. So if this goes a bit wrong, sorry, let's just see, because we did try and set it up before. There we go. So one of the things that we know about these bands is that the closer or the shorter it is, the harder it is. You're getting more resistance. So if you're wider apart, it's easier. The closer you are together, the shorter. So if you're tying the feet together quite tightly, it's harder. There's more resistance than if you're allowing them more space to move. Now, those of you who use bands for Pilates or yoga will already have some idea of how these bands are used. Some notes of caution. When you tie them, make sure they are secure, because it's very easy for them, the knots, to come undone. It should always be knotted twice to affix it. So you do need quite a reasonable length. It's no good having a short piece if you want to tie it to something and then not having enough room to tie it to your arm or your leg or your hands, or you've made it too short. You can tie it into rings so that you've got a ring already made, and that is just as easy to exercise with, and it saves you having to keep knotting it every time. That's only if you've got enough to actually do that and you don't want to keep changing it. Now, if you go onto the internet, there is a free TheraBand. You go onto TheraBand, it's THERABAND. TheraBand have their exercise program free to download on the internet. So you can get lots of ideas for uses of the band. TheraBand are quite keen, but others do not adhere to this, of keeping the band away from the face. Now, when we talk about suspending, it is possible to use it to suspend the head and do head exercises, but beware of making sure that you are holding it with the person who's exercising. It is not tied, because you don't suddenly want to fall. So if you're using it for exercises, you've got to be careful that it doesn't smack into your face. You've got to be careful it doesn't drop and your head doesn't fall, hurt your head. So do be careful when using it. There are also some types, this one in particular, this is this orange one, that the Meglio, it's a little bit sticky and it wouldn't be nice in a very fine hair. You probably find that in fine hair, it would actually pull a bit. The other thing is, as you notice with these thinner bands, as you stretch them, they get quite thin. So it wouldn't work for a head. It needs to be one of the tougher ones, blue, green, or even the blacks that you're using for the head, because it's still quite wide even when it's stretched. And that's important. When I stretch it, it's still quite wide. When you stretch these lightweight bands, you can see it goes into almost a string, and that can be a problem. So try and keep these lighter weight bands away from the hair and the head. Use the heavier ones, the blue or the green or the black, if you want to suspend the head or do head exercises, which you can do with this. Now, I would only myself recommend that you do the pushing back exercise. I wouldn't recommend any where it touches the face. And while we're talking about bands, there are other sorts of bands that we have to think of, and they are elastic bands. And if we're talking about hands, wrists, fingers, then there's no reason that you can't go into your rubbish drawer, find elastic bands, and do exactly the same with your fingers, big elastic band around your hands, and pull them apart. So don't forget, an elastic band is just a skinny version of this already tied up. So don't forget the really nice value of elastic bands. You can do fingers with elastic bands. As I say, you can do hands with elastic bands. You can spread your fingers with elastic bands. So there's a lot of nice hand and finger exercise you can do with an elastic band, which is the same idea as the TheraBand, which I think is probably where the TheraBand came from, because if there's any OTs over the age of about 45, they all used to use elastic bands for hand exercises. So there we have a few ideas, simple basic ideas for the bands to use, some precautions, make sure they're knotted well, keep it away from the face. Do not allow children to flick it at each other. It really can give quite a nasty smack, particularly in the face. So if you've got youngsters who are being a little naughty, let's leave it at that, do not allow them to start flicking band at siblings. It's not pleasant. Okay, so we know that we can use it to take the weight of limbs, and we can use it for exercise. Back to what we are saying always about exercise. Firstly, you will not damage muscle in SMA by working against resistance. Resistance is everything that we know of. We know that the weight of gravity that a normal child, baby, infant, adult does not think of the effect of gravity pressing down. We move against gravity with no thought. When you are a type 1, type 2, or a weaker type 3, the effect of gravity is immense. And that effect of gravity is what stops you sitting, stops you standing, stops you lifting your arms, stops you walking. That in itself is resistance. The pressure of gravity pushing down is resistance. Anything that stops a movement happening or makes a movement harder is resistance. Whatever you're pushing against, whether it moves, whatever you're pulling against, whatever you're lifting against, if you're lifting a weight, if you're pushing a weight, if you're pulling, pushing, it's like the broken down bus. You can work really hard and go nowhere. All of that is resistance. The question is, how much is the right resistance? How long should you stick with the resistance? And what are we actually trying to exercise? All this is just another way of exercising. We know with SMA about fatigue. We don't want to go to the point of fatigue. That is the only place for which we stop the exercise. There is no point in taking a heavy weight if you can't lift it. This is a 2 kilo weight. It's quite heavy for me. I would find difficulty doing my Pilates class with a 2 kilo weight. There is no point in using weight that's too great, because you won't do it for long. You will have the same aching and problems with your muscles as anybody else would. And the other problem you have, if you have too much resistance, is you start using different muscles. You start getting what we call reinforcement, that other muscles kick in, and you don't really get the result you want to achieve because it all starts going wrong. So to put too much resistance or too much weight is not a good idea. We need to balance what is the right weight, the right resistance, the right force to allow us to do the movement with some effort, but not make it so much effort that we're using either the wrong muscles or we can't do very many of them. We know that to build power is high weight, low repetition. To build stamina is low weight, high repetition. And ideally, what we're looking for is stamina, to keep going. Why are we not looking for power? Firstly, because it's much harder to build the sort of power that's going to change a movement. You have all seen pictures of bodybuilders with these amazing muscles, but it's not useful in your everyday life to build that sort of muscle for certain movements. Just to be able to bend my elbow with a great big weight on or push a great big weight above my head is not going to make a difference. Plus, even with the treatments that we have, there is still a maximum that every individual with SMA can achieve. Unless you are treated pre-symptomatically, you will still never make those muscles normal. And also, what I'm constantly banging on about is if you exercise the wrong muscles, you can end up with more contractures. More contractures will interfere with function and movement, so in the end, it becomes a useless exercise. We need to build the right muscles. We need to build stability into our joints as well. And this is something with SMA we forget about: the stability of the joints, the ability just to keep still when we want to, the ability to be able to push weight through our arms for transfers allows us, I'm not moving very far, but I'm building stability around my shoulders to allow me to lift my bottom to help with transfers. Even if I'm not doing the transfer myself, it allows me to help with a transfer. It allows me to transfer weight if I'm constantly sitting on one bottom. This is building stability around muscle, and this is what TheraBand is really nice for, because there's a lot of stability building, a lot of work on actually doing shoulders. It's a great shoulder exerciser. One of the nice things that you can do is have a loop at one end, and then you can put a hand in it or a foot in it. And we need to think about, again, where do we want to exercise? So let's start at the top and work down. We've looked at the idea of heads. Again, I would not use, personally, I don't recommend it for heads apart from pushing back. So you can have your head suspended and allow yourself to push back against the resistance, and that will build neck extension. It is much harder to build neck flexion into this without having a band here, which again, I'm not really that happy about. You could possibly, if you want to, have a band across your forehead and push forwards, but it's quite hard work. With the softer bands, again, as I say, be careful, because if you do a lot of work, if you stretch the band too much, it goes quite stringy and can be more uncomfortable. When you're doing this sort of thing, anywhere near your face or your head, have someone with you to help, just so that you do not end up getting it in the wrong part of your face. Really important, but you can use it for heads. Shoulders. One of the things we know is this awful kyphotic curvy posture. If your little child has that horrible kyphotic curvy posture, the first thing you need to do is get them off the floor. Get a wedge under their bum, get them on a little seat, get them on a little prime box, doesn't matter what. Get them off the floor will save this posture. But if you're older and you want to work on it, we do one. The bow and arrow is a lovely, lovely exercise. So you have one arm as straight as possible and you're pulling this elbow back. Now, if you're sitting in a wheelchair, this is quite hard because you often find that your arm gets stuck on the wheelchair. So just start with your arm further forward and pull your elbow back. Don't worry if it's not coming all the way back, although that's the idea. So if you can be sitting on the bed or out of your wheelchair. So this is the movement that we're looking for. Really nice shoulder movement. This is the bow and arrow style. Don't forget both hands. The other nice thing about the bow and arrow is that you're having to try and extend that arm to pull this arm back. Not an easy one. If you find it hard to grip, again, the loop may be a better way of doing it so that you have the loop around your hand and then you're pulling this one back. So if you're having problems gripping TheraBand, then tie loops to hold on to, or loops for your wrists may be easier. And again, you can have 2 loops and pull back that way. Not everybody finds it that easy to hold TheraBand, but loops, again, make it easier. The problem with loops is obviously it limits, so that you then need to make sure you have a long length. When you buy them in at least a meter. You don't want anything that comes shorter than a meter. It's not going to be a very useful length at all. Many of you hopefully will be able to get lengths of TheraBand from your therapy team. I know we can give out to our children. Hopefully other teams can give to theirs. And a couple of meters is quite nice. And again, if you have difficulty holding on, a couple of loops will make it easier. You need to loop it quite close. Just loop round and do it like that. Be careful that it doesn't get too thin and start cutting in. Loops are actually one of the best ways of doing this. So that's the first shoulder one. You can, if you have a big enough piece, put it across your back and try and pull it round the front. So that's not a difficult one. I think we've got to where I was here. We're pulling round. I can only see myself in a tiny little corner of the screen, so I'm not sure if I can get any bigger. If there's any way of making me bigger. That's a bit better. It's not good, but it's better. Okay, so shoulders. If you have an overhead hoist, you may be able to set up a pulley system where if you have one weaker arm and one stronger arm, you can set it up as a pulley so that as one goes down, the other one goes up, and you can pull that way, and that will help, and that will give you a nice shoulder stretch as well. So you can set it up over your hoist bar and try making it into a pulley. You can pull down from your hoist bar so that you're pulling down. And the thing about that is the longer you have it, the lower you will start. But if you have your loop set quite high, you've got your arm in your loop, you can make it as short as you like. So you can start from quite high and pull down, or you can start from lower and pull down. And as you come down, you are exercising different parts of the muscle. So that's very useful. Don't forget across this way. It's not only back. You want, my friend's here with her arm dangling. Pull it across you. Now you can do one arm at a time. You can be tied to something. Again, if you have a portable hoist, or you can bring your hoist bar down, you can use your hoist bar to do it one, or you can do two at the same time. if that's easier. Now, one of the things about exercising shoulders, ideally, your elbows are as straight as possible. Now, that's always hard. Unless you're strung up and you can pull down, and again, you will tend to pull down with your elbow bent, but it's still shoulder exercise. It's really hard when you can't get your arms and your shoulders up to work from there. Okay, you don't have to, so work from here. You can still exercise your shoulders down here, even if you've got your elbows in. By pushing outwards, you are still working your shoulders. You may not think so until you try doing it, but actually that is rotation of your shoulders, and that is a nice movement as well. So you can do it. You can do it two ways. You can keep your elbows tucked in and just spread your hands, which is rotation, or you can keep your shoulders still and work that way, which is abduction. So you can still, even if you cannot get your arms out or keep your elbows, you can't get your arms to shoulder height, you can't keep your elbows straight, there is still plenty you can do with your elbows bent. As I say, one, keep your elbows tucked in is rotation, elbows out is abduction. Again, you can do one side using the other one. The nice thing about this is just doing one side. If you keep this left elbow tucked in, you push just with your right one. This one is working as well to stabilize. It's what we were saying, stability. So I'm still working this one, even though I'm pulling with the other one. So there's lots of things you can do that will increase that stability. I can try and extend one elbow. I can pull down. I can keep this one bent and pull down from there. What I love about TheraBand is it's there. You can keep it there. There is no excuse that it's not available. You have to go and get it. It's not a great big piece of equipment. It's light. You can tie it onto your wheelchair. You can have it there tied around your feet. You can do it at any time. You can do it lying on the bed. You can do it sitting on a normal chair. You can do it sitting on the settee. You can do it in your wheelchair. You can do a lot of these things standing up. There is a lot of things you can do with TheraBand standing up. Again, you will find them on the website. Okay, if we move down to legs, there are so many things you can do with legs. The first one, as you probably all know, is tie your legs together. That's an easy one. Try and pull those legs apart. Now that is working down the side of your hips, your abductors and your rotators. Strangely enough, and this is particularly true for the type 3s, one of your weaker movements will be the one where you're pulling legs together. So actually what you want is some way of pulling across the middle. So you're tied over there and you're pulling inwards. You can start from out and pull across, or you can go at the ankle with a straight knee and try pulling across. And the muscles down the middle of the thighs often get neglected because it's so much easier to tie the band around the knees, do your clams when you're lying on or sitting on your side. Everybody who's ever done Pilates or yoga will know about the clams. So this is something that's always exercising the outer muscles, and we forget our inner muscles. So we need somehow to pull inwards, in, across. And again, sitting in a chair, sometimes the chair gets in the way, sometimes the other leg gets in the way. You may need to do it on the bed. If you can't get onto the floor, which many adults can't, then you really need to try and rig it up either with a portable hoist. Is lovely for this because it's nice and strong and you can move it around. If you find that the way your hoist is set up or the way your bed is set up, you can only ever exercise one leg, then put your head at the other end. Don't forget, there's nothing to stop you putting your head at the foot end of the bed and working the other side of you so that you get both sides worked. This is if you find it difficult to position your hoist. You can exercise your feet. One of the things that you can do with your feet is the pulling in exercise. So it's in and out, in. So you can exercise your feet. The one thing we don't want is the pushing down. Strangely enough, it's not an easy one to do, thankfully. But what is nice is the knee straight one. The pushing straight from the knee. And that is a lovely, lovely knee exercise. And what it does is, if you can manage with your arms, and this is a lovely type 3 exercise or an adult exercise, to hold on to the TheraBand and push straight. Now you can do this one in sitting, you can do it sitting on a chair, you can do this one in standing. Really nice exercise. It's also good for your shoulders because you're holding your shoulders back and you're working your knee and your hip really nicely. Lovely, lovely leg exercise. For those of you who are feeling clever, if you've got your feet on something slidey, if you're lying down, going back to our slidey piece of cardboard, get a piece of slidey cardboard, stick it under your feet so that you've got something nice to slide on. Makes it a bit easier, but it's a lovely way. Again, some of the weaker children might find this easier, some of the weaker adults, to slide your feet on a slidey piece of board. You can do it with one. Is easier than having it up in the air, so you're sliding against resistance. That's a nice way of doing it. And the beauty of that is you can slide in and out as well. So you can get some work across. Okay. We can obviously do the clamp. As I was saying, one of the things about this is, in the same way with arms, the wider you have it apart, the easier it is. You really want to start with your knees virtually together. If you do your knees rather than your feet, you will get different muscles. So you are pulling apart, getting those muscles working. It is a really good exercise. It's a tough exercise. Blue is quite a difficult one for this. You may even want to go as light as cream and start with something easy and push. For the littlies, this is something they can do, pushing out. It's easy for them to flop out. It's a totally different thing to push out. And then you can go to ankles. Again, you might want to be on your slidey bit of board. Is a lovely way of exercising. Don't forget the slidey board. It's a really easy way of starting to do some of these exercises. You will still feel it working those outside hips. Type 3s, you need this exercise. You need those hips building up. And the other thing about this is it's not working these muscles here, which is the ones we want to avoid. Okay, can you use it for your spine and trunk? No, not that easy. You can't really use your core unless you're doing it as total movements. If you want to use core, then you're going to have to do big movements where you're pulling your whole body back, where you're using whole leg movements, where you're doing side to side. Now that's a lot more difficult to set up. You're really going to have to tie yourself cleverly so that you are literally pulling legs in one direction to do your abdominals, what we call the obliques. It will help to work your tummy muscles, or you're going to have to do whole body and trunk movement to get any core work. It's really big movements. You need to understand how to set up for those movements. You may need help from a physio because you're really going to have to pull way over to get these tummy muscles working. You will get a little bit of tummy stability when you're doing shoulders, a little bit of tummy stability when you're doing legs. If you really want to exercise your core with the bands, you're going to have to get some help on how you set it up, because you really need to move that whole body to get your trunk pulling right across, and it's where you attach it. It's all very well door handles, but you don't want to pull your door handles off. You don't want to be wrecking furniture. Again, this is where hoists come in well, but some of the type 3, some of the stronger people, some of you adults are not going to be able to. Parents as well, don't forget that core when you're doing your TheraBand. Now, there are core exercises you can do in standing, but as the majority are not standing, stick to your Joe Wicks. Don't forget, if you're doing Joe Wicks, there's no problem with doing a bit of TheraBand in there as well. Andy, have we got any questions?
We have.
Go to some questions.
Sure, right. First question, when you say get the children off the floor, do you mean a 90-degree angle at the knees and ankles, or a lower seat is enough as well?
A small wedge is enough. Basically, one of the reasons the children become kyphotic is because the hamstrings, which is the muscle down the back of the leg, I untie my dolly, we might be able to show. Basically, the hamstrings are pulling the pelvis backwards. So what you get is you get the hamstrings down the back of the legs are pulling the pelvis backwards, and the only way the children can sit up when they're on the floor is by curving forwards to counter this pull of the pelvis backwards. Now again, you Pilates and yoga people will know all about the pelvis rolling backwards, and the only way you can sit is by countering it with body weight. If you take the pressure off the hamstrings, and this is not hamstring stretches, just take the pressure off the hamstring. It can be a tiny wedge, just a few inches, it doesn't matter, off the floor. Take the pressure off the hamstrings and you will help that kyphotic posture enormously. Doesn't have to be a 90-90.
Okay. Next question. Actually, one from me. Am I right in thinking the different TheraBands have different elasticity, so different strengths based on their colours?
Is different resistance, yes.
Okay.
So this, the blue one, is much harder to stretch. The cream, lighter weight. I don't have any black or grey. It's not something you would normally find in a pediatric department. You can get black and grey. I know the previous Pilates teacher used a lot of black and grey, but it really depends. When you look online, most colours are available. But just be aware that you need to get a resistance that will suit you. Red, yellow or lighter, your blue, green are around the middle, your greys and blacks are pretty much the toughest.
Awesome, thank you. Next question, can therapy bands help with high kneeling?
That's an interesting question because it's dependent. My feeling is high kneeling is that position here, when you're up here, so that you're kneeling, not on sitting on your heels, but kneeling in this position. Now, I'm not sure how it's supposed to help. If you think by putting the therapy band across your bottom would help, my feeling is what would probably happen is they just want to push back into it. So I'm not sure where you're going to put the therapy band to help with high kneeling, because this ultimately is going to pull back. What you need is somehow to stimulate this to tighten forwards, and I'm not sure where you're going to put the band to encourage this movement. So I'm not sure that it would help with high kneeling.
Okay, thank you. How can bands help with tight hip contractures?
By working the muscles that go the opposite way. So if you have a hip flexion contracture, where your leg is forwards so that you're stuck with your leg in flexion. The way that you can help with a therapy band is either inside lying is a good position. You're taking the weight using the band. I'll just use blue because that's the one to hand. So I'm taking the weight of the leg, and what I'm getting the child or even adult, because I've used this with adults as well, is encourage them to kick the leg backwards. Now, anything that works the opposite movement will help reduce the contracture in two ways. Firstly, because you'll get natural stretch of that as it relaxes. And the other thing is you are building muscle work in the opposite movement to help counter that. Now, remember with hip flexion contractures, if you are sitting a lot of the time, you are always going to be prone to hip flexion contractures. We try to minimize them. You can't just do it with bands. It takes a lot of stretching. It takes things like standing, positioning in bed, but you can help by kicking the leg backwards. So to get the opposite movement, you're going backwards with your leg. The one way you are pushing out straight also helps to tighten up your butt muscles. It's your butt muscles that are the weak muscles that allow the hip flexion contractures to develop. And they do with most people. We try and anticipate it. We know it's going to happen. It's very, very hard to prevent hip flexion contractures when you're sitting all day or when that's your strongest muscle.
Okay, excellent. Just looking for questions. Some of the questions that have been coming in, you've actually answered as part of the talk.
But we can always reiterate them, Andy, so if people are, just to make sure that they realise that I've answered the question.
Okay, so one of the questions, what strength bands are for what type?
It's an interesting question, and it depends what you're trying to strengthen. We tend to use this very lightweight cream for the type 1s. We use it to take the weight, but you can use any color just for suspending. What we talked about at the beginning was the idea of suspending the limb. You can use any color for that. It doesn't have to just be the cream. If you're just trying to suspend a limb, you just want to take the weight of a limb, it can be any color. And in fact, if it's an older adult or teenager, then actually the cream is a little bit too stretchy. You probably want to go to red, yellow, or even blue, just for suspending the weight of the limb. For resistance, for the weakest people, yes, you're going to go for the cream colors, the light colors. As I say, this Meglio orange is their lightest. It is very light. It's got a strange feel to it. It's not quite as light as this one that we use for the little type 1s, but it is much lighter than many of the others. So if you're weak adult, you would want to go for the lighter weight ones. Type 3s, I would be looking at every color, because what we find in type 3 is there's a big variation in different muscles, different abilities. Don't assume that type 1, type 2, type 3 tells you everything. We have non-ambulant 3s, we have barely ambulant 3s, and we have quite strong 3s. I mean, we have 3s, let's get real, who have very little outward difficulty apart from stairs, getting up from the floor. And to many of you, that doesn't seem like very great difficulty at all. But what I find with the type 3s particularly is they are much, much more variable in the color they can cope with. So red, which is one of the lighter weight colors, may even be too tough for some of them to do leg exercises. Kicking, a great one when you're stuck in the wheelchair is to have your legs sort of tied and do lots of kicking exercises so that you're tied with your foot and you can spend lots of time kicking outwards. Now, some of the 3s will find the red is as hard as they can manage, and some can go up to the greens and harder ones. So in a way, to go somewhere around the middle to start with, and then you'll get an idea. As I say, greens, blues are the middle, but blue is very, very hard for a lot of people. We always start with the reds and the yellows and work up from there. You can use it double and get more resistance. So if you're going for red and it's nice and stretchy and a bit too easy, just make it harder by making it double it up, and then you'll get more resistance with the same color. So again, you've got blue, it's a little bit too easy, double it. Am I back?
Hello, you're back.
Good. Okay, did we get to the bit about doubling up?
Yes, we did. Question. Presumably the bands, the colours don't represent the type of patient. When you're not saying that use the cream ones just for paediatrics, it could be used for extremely weak adults.
No, it's weak.
Yeah.
It's weak. It's strengths and resistance. So yes, we tend to use the cream for the type 1 babies, but that's because they're some of the weakest. I would also use that in very weak. You can have a type 2 who's lost a lot of power, where you may find that the only resistance they can manage is cream, and then work up from there. So don't think you have to stick to one color. If it becomes too easy, or for some reason it becomes too hard, change color.
And you said about doubling up the bands.
Doubling up really does make a difference. Even with the cream, if cream becomes too easy, double it, and it virtually doubles the resistance. Tie it in 4, that is hard work. That is no longer easy cream. That is tough resistance. So just doubling it, even doubling it again, will give you more resistance. So if you have some muscles that are strong and some muscles that are weak, you found a color that works for your weak muscles, then you can double up for your stronger muscles.
Great, okay. Another question. How often would you recommend doing exercises with the bands?
Exercises with the bands is just another way of exercising. One of the beauties of the bands is if you tie it onto the wheelchair, particularly, it's there. One of the things that I find is that a lot of people will say, well, the equipment's not there, they can't do it, they can't exercise. But if you're stuck with a piece of TheraBand on your foot attached to the wheelchair, every time you move your foot forward, you're kicking, well, that's there. But like with all things, it's all part of a program. It may be that you're very keen and you want to use the therapy bands every day. It may be that you actually hate the things, but you know, it really has to be an individual thing. When we're talking about any of these things, it's what works for you. It's not what works for me. I am just showing you the possibilities. You have to fit it into your life, your lifestyle, your activities, your Joe Wicks program. A lot of you will be doing Zoom yoga and Zoom Pilates or Zoom exercise group.
No, you've gone again.
Am I here?
I can hear you. I just, hopefully, you're still frozen. Can you hear me?
I'm here.
Okay, awesome. Right, next question. Can bands build up muscle?
You can build up power with the bands, yes. But like with everything, you've got to do it regularly. You've got to keep going. Anybody will tell you once a week is not going to build up muscle. It's probably 3-4 times weekly at least to build up power. The question is, what do you want that power for? When you are looking at building up power, you have got to think about overall function and ability. It is no good just building up power in one group of muscles. That is not going to get you on your feet. That is not going to help by itself. The body is a total piece. It goes from head down to feet. Power is something you have to think about where you need it most for the activity you want to do. Core is important, but your arms and legs hang on to that core. Do you want stronger arms? Work those arms. Do you want stronger legs? Work those legs. Do you want a better posture? Do you want a better trunk? Work that trunk. But you may or may not be able to do the whole lot. To get the whole body fit needs a lot of work, needs a lot of movement.
You're back.
Okay. Yes.
That's pretty much all the questions we've got. I didn't know if there's anything else you wanted to go through.
Okay, we were going to talk generally about resistance and weight. When we are talking about bands, if you don't have bands, you can use a scarf for some of the things. You can use a scarf to take the weight of the arm. It does not have to be the band. So if you've got your hoist or wherever, your little frame, you can still take the weight of a limb with a scarf or piece of material, whatever you want. For this, suspension does not have to be a therapy band. Even a sling, collar and cuff, whatever, you can use that to take the weight of the arm. So don't think you need TheraBand for the little ones or the bigger ones to just take the weight. You can use whatever you've got at home to take that weight. When it comes to actually using weights, one of the things I said is you're not going to manage to work with 2 kilos. Even I can't use that very much. But you can use things instead. You can use jars, you can use bottles. If you find that they're too heavy or too big, there are some jars, there are cocoa pots, whatever, that are quite symmetrical. There's nothing stopping you lifting things up with 2 hands. You can have bottles, but they've always got a narrower neck, so you want something that is more symmetrical. One of the things that I really like are the smoothie bottles, because they are more straight up and down. You can fill that with whatever you want. You can put in anything from a few lentils to a load of lead shot. If you're a fishing buff, you've got a fishing buff in the family, again, you can use 2 arms. You can do side to side. You can use weights. If that's too big, the little spice jars, you will get, this is curry powder, but you can get a little spice jar, empty, but this has still got curry powder in. But you can use these for weight. It doesn't have to be heavy. You haven't got any jars, make weights out of a sock. An old sock, fill it up, sew it round, you've got your wrist weights. For the little ones, the little wrist rattles that you can use, even that is weight on a little wrist. So you've got your little wrist weight, or again, while you're in lockdown, little project, make some wrist weights and ankle weights. Great little thing to have for moving, little weights and ankle weights. Any of you can be sitting there with wrist weights. You can use a children's beach bucket to do exercise. It looks like one of those things that people exercise with, which I hate because I think they're a big strain on the back. But it's quite a nice idea to lift buckets. If you're sitting in the little paddling pool, you're lifting buckets of water. One of the groups of muscles that I said was very difficult to exercise was the muscles in between the legs. And one of the ways you can do it is with a squishy ball and squeezing. And that is a good way of exercising. You can do it with your legs straight. You can do it with your knees bent. You can put it between your knees. You can put it between your feet. So squishing something squishy, it is still resistance. You want something bigger, go for something bigger. And that's working different parts of the muscle if your legs are further apart. So you can have a ball here and you can be squeezing that between your knees or between your ankles. Harder to work that one. So resistance is anything that you have to push against, use a force, too hard, use a balloon. You can still do it. And again, one of the things that you can do is in and out with a ball or a balloon between your knees. It's adding resistance. It's adding work to what you're doing. So although you don't think of it as a weight or resistance, by having that in there is adding resistance. It's adding to the work that you're doing. Anything that adds work is resistance, it's weight. Heavier balls, again, as simple as lifting, throwing. As soon as you've got equipment that you're lifting or kicking, it is resistance. Another thing that you can use for a weight is the bags that go in the microwave. This is quite a nice weight. You can be using this. You can sew it into a round so that you can use it on your arms or on your legs. Again, use your imagination, look around the house, see what you can find. All things that you can be doing with resistance. So how are we going to get some work and some resistance around the core? That is one of the problems that people find. And the best way of working the core is, again, with big movements. You will do a lot of work tightening your tummy, all this sort of thing in your Pilates, but actually the core movements are your sit-ups or press-ups, like all these things that are big movements, and that's difficult when you're not very mobile. So how are you going to work your core against resistance? Okay, so if we're very weak, simple things like rolling can be done with resistance. Cores, is that where we got to, Andy?
It was.
Okay, so we're trying to work this core against resistance when we're not very strong. Again, whatever age. So that you're lying on your side and I am trying to stop you rolling backwards or stop you rolling forwards. I can resist you at your bottom. I can resist you at your shoulders. I can resist you at both. I can resist you at both at the front. And a lot of fun. It's hard work. If you're really quite weak, it's a great way of exercising. Adult or child, I've done this with adults, shown them a lot of work. It really is hard work to do resisted rolling. And that is resistance. That is working this tummy, these back muscles. And that's a good place to start. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to use equipment. The resistance is my hands. The resistance is your carer's hands, your partner's hands, whoever, against your child, resisting rolling. And again, make it a bit of fun. If you've got something that they want to get to, stop them doing it. You want to roll onto their back, stop them doing it. They want to roll all the way, then resist the rolling. But it's really good core exercise doing resisted rolling. That is one place to start with your core. Any questions, Andy?
No, no questions.
I
think we might have been Borised a bit today.
I think we've probably been Boris today. People will have to watch it later.
Yeah.
Okay, can use balls, therapy balls, and you can use peanuts for resistance, for core work. Obviously, sitting on a ball is great for your core, but you can do a lot of core work on a ball, but make sure, firstly, you have the right size ball. These inflatable balls will work for the smaller children. It doesn't have to be a great big therapy ball. Some of these inflatable balls, some of the big sponge footballs that you can buy in some of the shops are better than a therapy ball. The therapy balls are too big and hard to control. You can do a lot of core work, as people know, particularly this going forward. We don't want to encourage a lot of hip work here. We want to encourage a lot of trunk, side to side. And what resistance are you using? Using the resistance of gravity, and your resistance is also their own body weight. Remember, their own weight is giving resistance. If their head is going forward, that is a resistance they are going to have to counterbalance. If their trunk wants to fall that way, it's the resistance, then you've got to get them working against that. So your own body weight can provide resistance to movement. So you can do work on a ball for core. Obviously, for the back muscles, you can go this way on the ball. and try and get them to come up this way. And you can do that on a peanut again. It's all resistance. It's either resistance against your own body weight, it can be resistance against you pushing, or it can be resistance against gravity. So you can use balls, you can use peanuts. It's my current favorite. This is mine, it's just arrived. I've still got to work with it a bit. But you can do a lot of nice things on a peanut. Now, can adults work peanuts? Of course, adults can work on peanuts. There's no reason why an adult can't work on peanuts.
We
Are
are
we back?
We are,
Okay.
but I think we might have to sort of wrap up.
No, that's fine. Any questions? Any last questions?
No, I think probably everybody's having the same issue with the internet. Nobody's emailing anything.
Again, everybody's watching Boris. What we'll do is maybe have a quick resume in a fortnight of what we got up to tonight, and then we'll think about a topic for next time.
Sounds like a good plan.
Okay, thanks a million, Andy.
Thanks, Marion. Take care.
Take care, bye.